Captain Lee Taemin stood at the observation deck of the massive Coalition flagship and watched the stars drift past in the darkness of space. The ship called Harmony's Edge was bigger than most human cities back on Earth, and it housed representatives from 12 different alien species. Today was the day of the annual Coalition Assessment Summit, and Lee knew it would not be good news for humanity. The meeting hall buzzed with different sounds as alien delegates filled their seats. The Draknari made deep rumbling noises when they talked, and their reptilian faces showed no emotion. The crystalline Vorthak clicked and chimed like wind chimes in a storm. The insect-like Zilani chittered constantly among themselves, while their compound eyes scanned everything around them. The lumens floated as balls of pure energy and communicated through pulses of light that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Lee had been the human liaison officer for 3 years now, and he had learned to read the mood of these gatherings. Today felt different, and not in a good way. He could see the way the other species looked at the small human delegation with what seemed like barely hidden contempt. Dr. Park Hye-jin sat beside him, reviewing her medical research notes one last time. She had been working on treatments that could help all species in the Coalition, but Lee doubted anyone would care about her work today. Commander Kim Do-hyun checked his datapad for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His engineering reports showed how human innovations had improved Coalition technology by significant amounts over the past year, but he looked nervous about presenting them. Ambassador Choi Yunbi maintained her diplomatic smile, but Lee could see the tension in her shoulders as she prepared for what was coming. Chancellor Vex Thrawn of the Draknari Empire stood up first, and his massive form cast shadows across the chamber. His voice boomed when he spoke, and every delegate turned to listen. He began by praising the achievements of various coalition members over the past year. The Zilani had increased food production by 30%. The Vorthak had discovered new mineral deposits on 17 worlds. The Lumens had improved energy distribution across 40 systems. Then he paused, and his golden eyes fixed on the human section. Lee felt his stomach drop as he recognized the look. It was the same expression predators gave their prey before striking. However, we must address a concerning issue that has persisted for too long. Chancellor Vex Thrawn continued. The human contribution to our great coalition remains negligible at best. Despite occupying space and consuming resources, they have provided little of value to our collective advancement. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zilani delegate clicked approvingly, while the Vorthak chimed in harmonic patterns that sounded like laughter. Lee wanted to stand up and shout about all the things humans had done, but he knew it would only make things worse. Dr. Park leaned forward and whispered urgently to Ambassador Choi about the universal medical protocols that humans had developed. These protocols allowed doctors to treat patients from any species safely, but somehow the other races had forgotten who created them. Commander Kim pulled up files showing human engineering solutions that kept coalition ships running efficiently, but no one seemed to remember where these innovations came from. The Chancellor continued his speech and listed what he called the objective failures of humanity. Humans were too emotional, according to the Draknari. They lacked the efficiency that the Zilani valued. Their technology seemed primitive compared to what the Lumens could achieve. They did not have the artistic beauty that the Vorthak appreciated in their crystal formations. What made Lee angry was not just the insults, but the complete blindness of it all. He thought about his morning routine on the ship and how he had helped fix 3 different systems that other species could not understand. The translation matrix that allowed all these different aliens to communicate had been designed by humans, but somehow everyone forgot that fact. The emergency procedures that had saved lives during recent pirate attacks came from human military doctrine, but no one gave credit where it was due. Ambassador Choi finally stood up to speak, and the chamber fell quiet. She spoke in calm, measured tones about human contributions to the coalition. She mentioned the diplomatic solutions that had prevented wars between member species. She talked about medical advances that had increased lifespans across the galaxy. She described engineering innovations that had made space travel safer for everyone, but Lee could see that her words fell on deaf ears. The other delegates had already made up their minds about humanity's worth or lack thereof. They saw humans as the weakest link in their great alliance and wanted to do something about it. The vote was not even close when it finally came. 11 species voted in favor of what they called optimizing resource allocation by reducing human involvement in core systems. Only humanity voted against the measure. The official language made it sound reasonable, but Lee knew what it really meant. They were being pushed out of the coalition that their people had helped build and maintain. The Draknari Chancellor announced that human populations would be relocated to more suitable frontier worlds, where they could focus on activities better matched to their capabilities. The other delegates nodded approvingly as if they were doing humanity a favor by sending them away from civilized space. Lee watched Dr. Park gather her medical research with shaking hands, and he knew she was thinking about all the patients who would suffer without her treatments. Commander Kim stared at his engineering reports and probably wondered who would maintain the systems he had designed when humans were gone. Ambassador Choi maintained her diplomatic composure, but Lee could see the hurt in her eyes. As the meeting ended and delegates began filing out, Lee overheard casual conversations that made his blood boil. The Zilani delegate mentioned how much more efficient their operations would be without human interference. A Vorthak representative expressed relief that they would no longer have to deal with human emotional outbursts during crisis situations. The lumens pulsed in patterns that their translator interpreted as amusement about human, primitive problem-solving methods. None of them seemed to realize what they were really losing. Lee had spent years watching human innovations quietly make life better for every species in the coalition. The food distribution systems that prevented famines were based on human logistics. The communication networks that connected distant worlds used human engineering principles. The medical equipment that saved lives every day incorporated human, biological research. Walking back to his quarters that night, Lee made a decision that would change everything. He activated his personal communicator and sent a coded message to Admiral Kang Soo-jin of the human Deep Space Fleet. The message was simple, but its implications were enormous. They want us gone. Perhaps it is time to show them what that really means. The stars looked different to Lee as he stood at his window that night. They no longer seemed like points of light in a galaxy where humanity belonged. Instead, they looked like destinations for a people who would have to find their own way forward. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and harder decisions, but tonight, Lee allowed himself to feel angry about the injustice of it all. He thought about his parents back on Earth who were proud that their son served with aliens among the stars. Soon he would have to tell them that those same aliens had decided humanity was not worth keeping around. The irony was bitter, and Lee wondered if the coalition would ever realize what they had lost until it was too late to get it back. The research vessel New Horizon drifted silently through the void between star systems where no coalition patrols would find it. Admiral Kang Soo-jin had chosen this location carefully for the most important meeting in human history. Representatives from every human colony and outpost had traveled here in secret over the past 2 weeks. Captain Lee Tae-min arrived aboard a small transport that had been disguised as a routine supply run. Dr. Park Hae-jin came with a medical team that was supposedly investigating a viral outbreak on a frontier world. Commander Kim Do-hyun brought his entire engineering staff under the pretense of conducting deep space equipment tests. Ambassador Choi Yeon-bi had told the coalition she was visiting remote human settlements to discuss their upcoming relocation. Admiral Kong was waiting for them in the main conference room, and her expression was grim but determined. She had served in the coalition forces for 20 years and had watched human contributions be ignored or dismissed countless times. The recent vote had been the final insult that pushed her to take action. "Thank you all for coming," Admiral Kang said as the last delegates took their seats. "We have a decision to make that will affect every human in coalition space. The question is simple. Do we accept their judgment of our worth, or do we show them what losing us really means?" Dr. Park stood up first and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. The data she presented was staggering, and even the humans in the room seemed surprised by the scope of their own contributions. 78% of all medical protocols used in coalition hospitals had been developed by human doctors. These protocols were the only reason that different alien species could receive medical treatment outside their home worlds. The Draknari immune system rejects most standard treatments, Dr. Park explained. Human doctors figured out how to modify medications so they would work safely. The Zilani have completely different blood chemistry, but human research found ways to perform surgery on them. Without our medical knowledge, the Coalition health system would collapse within months. Commander Kim activated his own display and showed engineering schematics that made several officers whistle in amazement. 65% of Coalition engineering standards had human origins. The power distribution systems on every major ship and station used human designs. The gravity generators that allowed different species to live comfortably together were based on human physics research. The other species think their technology is superior, Commander Kim said with a bitter laugh. But they have been using our innovations for so long they forgot where they came from. Every time their systems break down, they call human engineers to fix them. Every time they need something built, they use our construction methods. Ambassador Choi presented the most shocking information of all. 89% of the translation matrices that allowed Coalition species to communicate had been created by human linguists. The diplomatic protocols that prevented wars between member species were based on human conflict resolution techniques. The trade agreements that kept the Coalition economy functioning used human legal frameworks. They can barely talk to each other without our help, Ambassador Choi said quietly. The Universal Translator converts their languages through human linguistic models. The emergency communication systems use human code structures. If we removed our contributions tomorrow, the Coalition would not be able to function as a unified organization. Dr. Yoon Jae-wook was the Coalition's director of infrastructure, but he was also secretly human. He had been hiding his species identity for years using advanced disguise technology. His presentation revealed the true extent of human integration into Coalition systems. 94% of crisis management procedures had human origins. The evacuation plans that saved lives during emergencies were written by human strategists. The disaster response protocols that prevented minor problems from becoming major catastrophes came from human experience with managing complex systems. Engineer Han Mi-young had designed the primary energy distribution network that powered most Coalition facilities. She had done this work under an alien identity because she knew that revealing her human heritage would lead to her ideas being dismissed. Her network was so efficient that it had become the standard across Coalition space, but no one knew that a human had created it. The room fell silent as the delegates absorbed the scope of what they were learning. Humanity had not just contributed to the Coalition. They had become its invisible foundation. Every major system depended on human innovations that had been quietly integrated into alien technology over the decades. Admiral Kang looked around the room and saw the anger and determination in every face. These were people who had dedicated their lives to building something greater than themselves, only to be told they were worthless. The time for patience and diplomacy had passed. I propose Operation Quiet Departure, Admiral Kang announced. We will systematically withdraw every human innovation from Coalition space. We will not steal or sabotage anything that belongs to them, but we will take back everything that is ours. Let them see how their perfect society functions without the humans they consider so worthless. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Human engineers would remove their custom modifications from Coalition ships during routine maintenance. Doctors would stop sharing their treatment protocols and withdraw their medical research. Human linguists would delete their translation algorithms and communication systems. Human strategists would remove their crisis management protocols from Coalition databases. They would do all of this gradually and quietly so that the Coalition leadership would not realize what was happening until it was too late to stop. By the time the aliens noticed that their systems were failing, humans would be long gone from Coalition space. The withdrawal began immediately. Engineer Han quietly modified her energy distribution network to remove all human-designed components. The network would still function for a while, but it would become increasingly unstable without the human engineering that made it efficient. Dr. Park began the process of removing human medical protocols from Coalition databases while training her staff to take only their own research when they left. Commander Kim organized teams of human engineers across Coalition space to begin the systematic removal of their innovations. They worked during maintenance cycles and routine inspections so their activities would not attract attention. Alien supervisors saw humans working on familiar equipment and assumed everything was normal. Captain Lee coordinated communication between the different teams to ensure that the withdrawal proceeded smoothly. He used human-designed communication networks that the Coalition could monitor but could not understand, because the encryption was based on human linguistic patterns that their translators could not decode. Ambassador Choi began the delicate task of preparing for humanity's departure from Coalition space. She had to arrange transportation for millions of humans across hundreds of worlds without alerting Coalition authorities to what was happening. She used diplomatic channels to arrange what appeared to be routine personnel transfers and family relocations. The first signs of system degradation began appearing within weeks, but Coalition technicians attributed them to normal wear and equipment aging. Navigation systems became less accurate but still functional. Communication networks experienced occasional glitches, but backup systems compensated. Medical equipment produced inconsistent results, but doctors assumed they needed recalibration. 3 months into the operation, the Coalition leadership still had no idea what was happening. They were too busy celebrating their decision to optimize resource allocation by reducing human involvement. The Draknari Chancellor praised the improved efficiency that came from removing human emotional interference from important decisions. The Zilani expressed satisfaction with the elimination of human chaotic thinking from their planning processes. Admiral Kang watched the Coalition's slow decline with mixed feelings. Part of her felt satisfaction at seeing the aliens discover their dependence on human innovations. But another part of her felt sad about leaving behind the dream of a truly cooperative galactic civilization. She had believed in that dream once, but now she knew it had been built on a foundation of human effort that was never acknowledged or appreciated. As the 6th month approached, Admiral Kang prepared to give the final order that would complete humanity's withdrawal from Coalition space. The last human transport ships were loaded and ready to depart for the frontier worlds that would become humanity's new home. Soon the Coalition would discover what they had really lost when they decided that humans were not worth keeping around. Stars looked different from the bridge of the New Horizon as Admiral Kang prepared to lead her people into an uncertain but independent future. Behind them lay a galaxy that would soon learn the true cost of overlooking humanity's worth. Ahead lay the challenge of building something better than what they were leaving behind. Chancellor Vex Thrawn of the Draknari Empire stood in his private office aboard the Coalition flagship and stared at the emergency reports flooding his desk. 6 months had passed since the successful vote to relocate human populations, and everything was falling apart. The irony was not lost on him that the species he had dismissed as worthless might somehow be connected to the disasters plaguing Coalition space. The first major crisis had occurred 3 weeks ago when the merchant vessel Crystal Wind became stranded between star systems. The ship's navigation computer had suffered what technicians called a cascade failure that left the crew unable to plot a course home. Rescue ships dispatched to help them experienced similar navigation problems, and it took 5 days to bring everyone to safety using old manual navigation methods that most pilots had forgotten how to use. Hive speaker Klixa of the Zilani Collective chittered nervously as she reviewed reports from her industrial worlds. Production efficiency had dropped by 40% across all sectors, and no one could explain why. The automated systems that managed their factories kept making decisions that seemed logical individually, but created chaos when viewed as a whole. Food shipments were being sent to worlds that had no population while inhabited colonies went hungry. Raw materials were being processed into products that no one had ordered, while essential items remained unmanufactured. Resonance Prime spoke, for the lumens, and his energy patterns pulsed with confusion and growing alarm. The power distribution networks that supplied energy to Coalition facilities were becoming increasingly unstable. Blackouts occurred randomly across different sectors, and the backup systems designed to prevent such failures were themselves failing. Energy beings like the lumens found these power fluctuations particularly disturbing, since they depended on stable energy fields for their basic existence. The universal translator system had become a source of constant embarrassment and occasional danger. During a recent diplomatic meeting between the Draknari and Zilani, the translator had converted the Draknari word for friendship into the Zilani term for parasitic infection. The resulting diplomatic incident had required 2 days of careful explanation to resolve. Even worse was the mistranslation that had occurred during a medical emergency when emergency surgery was translated as ritual dismemberment, causing panic in a hospital treating injured Vorthak crystal beings. Chancellor Vex Thrawn called an emergency meeting of the Coalition Science Council to demand explanations for the growing chaos. The assembled experts represented the finest minds from each member species, but their reports only added to his confusion and growing anger. The navigation failures appear to be caused by corrupted backup protocols, reported the Draknari chief engineer. However, we cannot determine who originally programmed these protocols or how they became corrupted. Our engineers can repair individual failures, but they do not understand the underlying system architecture well enough to prevent future problems. The Zilani industrial coordinator clicked frantically as she explained the production crisis. Our automated systems are reverting to what appears to be an earlier and less sophisticated version of their control software. The current algorithms that we have been using for decades are disappearing from our databases and being replaced by much simpler versions that do not account for the complexity of modern coalition commerce. A Vorthak technician chimed melodically about the communication problems. The universal translator has lost access to its advanced linguistic databases. The translation matrices that allowed for nuanced communication between species have been replaced by basic word substitution algorithms that frequently produce meaningless or offensive results. We are essentially communicating at the level we achieved 300 years ago before the development of modern translation technology. The Lumen energy specialist pulsed dimly as he described the power grid instabilities. The sophisticated load balancing and efficiency optimization systems that have managed our power networks for centuries are offline. The replacement systems are functional but primitive. They can provide basic power distribution, but they cannot handle the complex energy requirements of modern coalition facilities during peak demand periods. Chancellor Vex Thrawn felt a cold dread growing in his stomach as he listened to these reports. A pattern was emerging that he did not want to acknowledge. "Are you telling me that all of our advanced systems are reverting to earlier versions?" he asked. "That appears to be correct," the Draknari engineer replied. "However, we have no records of these earlier systems in our archives. It is as if the advanced versions were added to our technology base by someone else and are now being removed by the same unknown party." The Chancellor dismissed the Science Council and activated his personal communication system to contact other coalition leaders. The conversations that followed confirmed his worst fears. Similar system degradations were occurring across all coalition territories and affecting every major infrastructure component. The Zilani Hive speaker reported that her people's entire industrial complex was grinding to a halt. "We always prided ourselves on our efficiency," she chittered anxiously. "But now we realize that our efficiency was based on organizational principles that we do not fully understand. Our hive mind is excellent at following complex procedures, but we never questioned where those procedures came from." Resonance Prime's energy patterns flickered with what could only be described as panic. "Our energy manipulation abilities are sophisticated, but they require stable technological foundations to be effective. The power management systems that we have relied upon for centuries are failing, and we do not know how to replace them. We can generate energy, but we cannot distribute it efficiently without the advanced control systems that are disappearing." The Vorthak harmony singer produced crystalline tones that conveyed deep concern. "Our crystalline technology interfaces perfectly with coalition systems, but we realize now that we never understood how those systems actually worked. We assumed that our crystal resonance abilities were sufficient to maintain our technology, but it appears that the underlying software and control mechanisms were created by someone else." Chancellor Vex Thrawn spent sleepless nights reviewing historical records and trying to piece together the puzzle. Slowly, a terrible picture began to emerge. Every major technological advancement that the Coalition had achieved over the past century could be traced back to periods when human involvement in those projects had been particularly high. The advanced medical protocols had been developed during a plague outbreak when human doctors had worked alongside Coalition physicians. The sophisticated power distribution networks had been designed during a major expansion period when human engineers had led many construction projects. The universal translator improvements that had made modern diplomacy possible had been implemented by joint teams that included human linguists. The industrial automation systems that had made coalition commerce so efficient had been developed with heavy input from human systems analysts. Even the navigation improvements that had made space travel safer and faster had been created during a period when human pilots had been training coalition crews in advanced flying techniques. The realization hit Chancellor Vex Thrawn like a physical blow. Humans had not been minor contributors to coalition society. They had been the invisible architects of coalition civilization. Every major system that kept their society functioning smoothly had been designed or significantly improved by human innovation. The other species had become completely dependent on human technology without ever realizing it. The Chancellor activated his emergency communication system and attempted to contact the human leadership. He discovered that Ambassador Choi Yun-bi and her entire diplomatic staff had departed Coalition space 3 months ago. Captain Lee Tae-min had requested transfer to a frontier posting and had not been seen since. Dr. Park Hee-jin had taken leave to visit her family on Earth and had never returned. Commander Kim Do-hyun had been reassigned to a deep space research mission that appeared to have taken him outside Coalition territory. Panic spread through Coalition leadership as they realized that humanity had not simply been relocated to frontier worlds. They had disappeared entirely from Coalition space and taken their knowledge with them. The systematic nature of their departure suggested that this had been planned rather than coincidental. Emergency teams were dispatched to the frontier worlds where humans were supposedly being relocated. The teams found empty colonies and abandoned research stations. Equipment had been removed and databases had been wiped clean. It was as if millions of humans had simply vanished from the galaxy. Chancellor Vex Thrawn stood once again in his office and watched as another emergency report appeared on his desk. The central communication hub on Nexus Prime had gone offline and cut communication between Coalition worlds. Technicians had discovered that every backup system was designed with human engineering principles that no one else understood. The Coalition that had dismissed humanity as worthless was discovering that they could not function without the people they had rejected. The price of their arrogance was becoming clear as their civilization slowly collapsed around them. 1 year after humanity's disappearance from Coalition space, Chancellor Vex Thrawn stood before the emergency session of the Coalition Council and surveyed the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's greatest civilization. The massive chamber that had once buzzed with the confident voices of 12 species now echoed with desperate whispers and the sounds of failing technology. Entire sectors of Coalition space had gone dark when their communication systems finally collapsed completely. The Outer Rim territories had not been heard from in 3 months, and rescue missions kept getting lost when their navigation systems failed. The core worlds were still connected, but their infrastructure was crumbling faster than repair crews could fix it. The medical crisis had reached catastrophic proportions. Dr. Park Hye-jin's universal treatment protocols had been humanity's gift to Coalition medicine, but without her people to maintain and update them, the systems were failing. The Zilani could no longer receive emergency surgery on non-Zilani worlds, because the cross-species medical compatibility algorithms had degraded beyond usefulness. 3 Vorthak diplomats had died on a Draknari world when doctors could not figure out how to treat crystalline beings with their remaining primitive medical technology. Hive speaker Klixa reported that Zilani industrial production had dropped to less than 30% of previous levels. Our hive mind is efficient at following procedures, but we never learn to innovate or adapt when those procedures fail, she chittered mournfully. We discover now that human creativity was what allowed our rigid thinking to function in a complex galaxy. Without their flexible problem-solving abilities, we cannot modify our systems to deal with new situations. Resonance Prime's energy patterns were dim and unstable as he described the power grid failures that plagued Lumen worlds. We can generate infinite energy, but we cannot distribute it effectively without the management systems that humans designed. Our worlds experience rolling blackouts because we never understood the sophisticated algorithms that balanced supply and demand across our networks. We are energy beings who cannot properly manage energy systems. The Vorthak Harmony Singer produced discordant crystal tones that reflected the chaos in their territory. Our crystal technology requires precise harmonic frequencies to interface with coalition systems, but those systems no longer exist in their advanced forms. We can make beautiful music with our crystals, but we cannot make them function as computer interfaces without the software architectures that humans created. Chancellor Vex Thrawn had authorized increasingly desperate measures to locate humanity and bring them back. Coalition scout ships searched every frontier world and remote system. where humans might have established colonies. They found abandoned outposts and empty research stations, but no sign of where millions of humans had actually gone. The breakthrough came when Scout Captain Relk Voss discovered energy signatures in a region of space that coalition maps marked as uninhabitable. The stellar phenomena in that area created radiation fields that were supposedly lethal to most known life forms. However, the energy readings suggested the presence of large technological installations that should not have been able to exist in such a hostile environment. Admiral Keth Jara led the first official expedition into the region, and what she found there shattered every assumption the Coalition had made about human capabilities. Thriving colonies existed on worlds that Coalition science said were impossible to inhabit. Massive orbital installations harvested energy from the deadly radiation fields and converted it into power sources more efficient than anything the Coalition had ever achieved. The humans had not simply hidden in some remote corner of the galaxy. They had transformed hostile space into a paradise using technology that made Coalition achievements look primitive by comparison. Cities floated in the upper atmospheres of gas giants where the pressure should have crushed any structure. Underground colonies flourished on frozen worlds where the cold should have made life impossible. Desert planets had been terraformed into garden worlds using techniques that Coalition scientists could not even begin to understand. Admiral Keth Jara's initial contact with human defenses was equally shocking. The Human Confederation's patrol ships moved with speeds that Coalition vessels could not match and used weapons that Coalition sensors could barely detect. When challenged by Confederate forces, the Coalition expedition was politely but firmly escorted to a space station that dwarfed anything in Coalition space. President Choi Yoon-bi received the Coalition delegation in a conference room that overlooked a vista of human achievement that seemed impossible. Through transparent walls, they could see vast shipyards where vessels were being constructed, using techniques that violated known laws of physics. Terraforming platforms worked on distant worlds and transformed them before the delegates' eyes. Space installations harvested resources from asteroid fields with an efficiency that made Coalition mining operations look like children playing with toys. "Welcome to the Human Confederation," President Choi said with a smile that contained no warmth. "I assume you are here to discuss the difficulties that Coalition space has been experiencing since our departure." Chancellor Vex Thrawn struggled to find words as he stared out at the impossible achievements surrounding him. "How did, you accomplish all of this in just 1 year?" he finally managed to ask. "1 year?" President Choi laughed softly. "We have been preparing for this possibility for decades. Every time the Coalition dismissed human contributions or treated us as inferior, we quietly developed alternatives. When you finally decided to remove us from your society, we were ready to build something better." Dr. Park Hae-jin entered the conference room, and Chancellor Vex Thrawn was shocked by the transformation in her appearance. Gone was the nervous scientist who had tried desperately to gain recognition for her medical research. In her place stood a confident leader who carried herself with the authority of someone who controlled medical technology that could extend the lifespan of any species by centuries. "We have made remarkable advances since leaving Coalition space," Dr. Park said calmly. "Without the burden of maintaining your failing systems, our researchers have been free to pursue genuine innovations. We have developed cures for diseases that plague every Coalition species. We have created medical techniques that could revolutionize treatment across the galaxy." Commander Kim Do-hyun appeared next, and his presence was equally unsettling to the Coalition delegates. The man they remembered, as a talented but underappreciated engineer, now commanded construction projects that reshaped entire star systems. His engineering teams built structures that defied Coalition understanding of what was possible. "We have also made contact with 3 new species that your explorers never encountered," Commander Kim mentioned casually. "They are eager to join our Confederation and contribute their own unique capabilities to our growing alliance. It seems that human adaptability and openness to cooperation attracts others who value diversity over hierarchy." Admiral Kang Soo-jin materialized as a holographic projection, and her image commanded immediate attention from every delegate in the room. The woman who had once served loyally in Coalition forces now led a military that could probably conquer Coalition space if they chose to do so. "We have been monitoring the situation in your territory," Admiral Kang said bluntly. "Your civilization is collapsing because you never understood that cooperation requires mutual respect. You treated humanity as servants rather than partners, and now you are discovering what happens when the servants decide to leave. Chancellor Vex Thrawn found his voice and made the speech he had prepared during the long journey to human space. He spoke about the Coalition's recognition of their mistakes and their desire to make amends. He offered unprecedented concessions, including equal representation regardless of population size and full recognition of human contributions to Coalition development. President Choi listened politely to his plea and then consulted with her advisors before responding. Your offer is generous, Chancellor, but it comes too late. We are no longer interested in joining the Coalition as members. We have built something better than what we left behind, and we will not abandon it to return to a society that treated us as inferior. The Coalition delegates stared in shock as they realized that humanity was not just refusing to return. They were refusing to save the Coalition from the collapse that human departure had triggered. The species that had once dismissed human worth now faced the prospect of watching their civilization die, while humans thrived in their independent confederation. Chancellor Vex Thrawn made one final desperate plea. Your people are dying in Coalition space. Millions of beings who depended on your medical technology and engineering innovations are suffering because of decisions they had no part in making. Surely your human compassion compels you to help them. President Choi's expression softened slightly, and she exchanged glances with her advisors. The room fell silent as the human leadership considered their response to this appeal to their better nature. The fate of the Coalition hung in the balance as humanity decided whether their former oppressors deserved salvation or deserved to face the consequences of their choices. The Human Confederation Council chambers buzzed with intense debate as the leadership grappled with the most important decision in their short but remarkable history. President Choi Yun-bi sat at the center of the circular room while voices rose and fell around her as humans argued about the fate of the Coalition that had rejected them. Dr. Park Hye-jin stood before a holographic display showing medical crisis reports from across Coalition space. Her voice carried the weight of a healer who had dedicated her life to preserving life regardless of species. Thousands are dying every day because they cannot receive proper medical treatment. The Draknari children born with genetic defects that we learned to cure years ago are being left to suffer. Zilani workers are dying from industrial accidents because the safety protocols we developed are no longer functioning. She paused and looked around the room at faces that showed the strain of making impossible choices. I understand the anger that many of you feel toward the Coalition leadership. I share that anger. But the beings who are suffering now are not the ones who voted to remove us from their society. They are innocent victims of decisions made by leaders who never consulted them. Commander Kim Do-hyun represented a different perspective, and his engineering mind focused on practical considerations rather than emotional appeals. If we return to help them, we will be validating their belief that they can treat us badly and still depend on us to solve their problems. They will learn nothing from this experience and will likely repeat their mistakes in the future. He activated his own display showing the thriving human colonies and advanced technology that surrounded them. We have built something unprecedented here, a civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than hierarchy and dominance. Why should we abandon our achievements to rescue people who never appreciated our contributions in the first place? Admiral Kang Soo-jin spoke with the authority of someone who had served in Coalition forces for decades before leading humanity's exodus. The Coalition military is in complete disarray. Their ships cannot navigate properly and their communication systems are failing. If we do not help them soon, they will be vulnerable to attack from the pirate fleets and hostile species that their strength once kept in check. She stood and walked to the center of the room where everyone could see her clearly. But we must also consider our own security. If Coalition space collapses into chaos, it could destabilize our entire region of the galaxy. The refugee crisis alone would be overwhelming. Sometimes helping your former enemies is really about protecting yourself. Captain Lee Tae-min had remained quiet during most of the debate, but now he rose to speak. His years as a liaison officer had given him unique insights into both human and alien psychology. I have worked closely with many Coalition species, and I can tell you that they are capable of growth and change. Their leadership made terrible decisions, but their people are not fundamentally evil. He looked directly at President Choi as he continued. The question is not whether they deserve our help. The question is what kind of civilization we want to be. Do we want to be the kind of people who turn away from suffering even when we have the power to stop it? Do we want to be remembered as the species that saved the galaxy or the species that watched it burn? The debate continued for hours as representatives from every human colony and research station voiced their opinions. Some called for complete isolation and letting the coalition face the consequences of their choices. Others advocated for immediate humanitarian intervention, regardless of political considerations. Still others proposed various middle ground approaches that would provide help while maintaining human independence. President Choi listened to every voice and weighed every argument before calling for a recess to consult with her closest advisors. In a smaller conference room, she met with the people who had been with her since the beginning of humanity's exodus from coalition space. "What does your heart tell you?" asked Dr. Park softly. "Not your head or your political instincts. What do you feel is the right thing to do?" President Choi was quiet for a long moment as she stared out at the stars that surrounded their space station. "My heart tells me that we cannot become the kind of people who ignore suffering just because we have been wronged. But my head tells me that we must be careful not to repeat the mistakes that led to this crisis in the first place." She turned back to face her advisors, and her expression showed the weight of leadership. "We will help them, but on our terms. We will not return to coalition space as members or subjects. We will establish the Human Confederation as an equal partner in galactic affairs, and we will insist on being treated with the respect that we have earned." The final session of the Confederation Council resulted in a unanimous vote to provide humanitarian assistance to coalition space while maintaining human independence. The terms of their aid were carefully crafted to ensure that humanity would never again be taken for granted or treated as inferior. President Choi returned to meet with the coalition delegation, and her announcement changed the course of galactic history. The Human Confederation will provide emergency assistance to stabilize coalition systems and prevent further loss of life. However, we will do so as an independent nation offering aid to a neighbor rather than as subjects returning to serve their former masters. Chancellor Vex Thrawn felt relief flood through him at the news that humanity would help save his people. "We accept your terms gratefully, President Choi. What do you require from us in return for this assistance?" "Recognition," President Choi replied simply. "Full diplomatic recognition of the Human Confederation as an independent and equal power in galactic affairs. Trade agreements that benefit both our peoples. Cultural exchanges that promote understanding between our species. Most importantly, a guarantee that humanity will never again be dismissed or undervalued by coalition leadership." Negotiations that followed established a new framework for galactic cooperation based on equality rather than hierarchy. Human medical teams returned to coalition space as foreign aid workers rather than coalition employees. Human engineers worked to repair critical systems while training coalition technicians to maintain them properly. Human diplomats established embassies on coalition worlds and welcomed coalition ambassadors to Confederation territory. The transformation was remarkable and swift. Coalition medical facilities that had been failing for months were restored to full functionality within weeks of human assistance arriving. Power grids that had been unstable for a year became more reliable than they had ever been before. Communication networks that had collapsed were rebuilt with improved efficiency and redundancy. But the most important changes were not technological, but social. Coalition species that had never bothered to learn about human culture suddenly discovered a rich civilization full of art and literature and music that enhanced their own understanding of the universe. Humans shared their innovations freely while also learning from alien perspectives that broadened their own knowledge. 5 years after the crisis that had nearly destroyed coalition civilization, Captain Lee Tae-min stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship Human Spirit and watched as joint human coalition exploration teams prepared to investigate newly discovered star systems. The man who had once been a frustrated liaison officer was now Admiral Lee, and he commanded respect throughout the galaxy. The exploration teams included members from every species in both the Coalition and the Confederation working together as true equals. When they encountered new civilizations, they spoke with one voice and offered partnership rather than domination. The galaxy had learned from the Great Humbling and was building something better than what had existed before. Dr. Park had established medical research facilities that served the entire galaxy, and her teams included brilliant minds from dozens of species working together to push the boundaries of what was possible. Commander Kim led engineering projects that spanned multiple star systems and created wonders that no single species could have achieved alone. Ambassador Choi had become the first Secretary General of the Galactic Cooperative Council, where humans and aliens worked as partners rather than masters and servants. The universe had learned that the most important contributions often came from those who seemed the most ordinary. The coalition species discovered that dismissing anyone's worth could cost more than any civilization could afford to pay. Humanity proved that respect must be earned through recognition and cooperation rather than demanded through hierarchy and force. Admiral Lee smiled as he watched the stars and thought about the future that lay ahead. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered by beings working together as equals. The price of overlooking humanity's worth had been paid in full, and the lesson would not be forgotten by future generations who would inherit a universe built on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority.